All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jose Ocaño. I'm the Senior Director of People and Culture here at Best Friends Animal Society. And I'm so excited to spend the next hour with you and some of my most favorite humans in this business to talk about activating diversity, equity, and inclusion in animal welfare. This is part 2 of a conversation we had last week. So if you hadn't checked out that first conversation, make sure to check out the network page and listen to that recording. You know, the discussions, excuse me, sorry, my screen decided to completely go blank. All right, here we go. So today's topic is, again, activating diversity, equity, and inclusion in animal welfare. This is a 2-part series, and welcome back to all of you. So some housekeeping that we want to make sure we're all on the same page on. Everyone is automatically muted for the presentation portion of the webinar so that you don't have to worry about accidentally unmuting yourself. If you have a question at any point, please type it in the Q&A box. Questions submitted through the Q&A box are only visible on our end. We may pause a few times throughout the presentation to answer questions from the Q&A if they are relevant to the topic at hand, but we have scheduled some time at the end of this call so that we can actually address some of your questions. And keep an eye also on the chat box for links to resources. These plus more will also be posted to the resource section on the town hall webpage sometime tomorrow. And this webinar is being recorded and it will be available after the session. So with that, I'm really excited to bring one of my friends, colleagues, and someone who has really helped shape the work we're doing here at Best Friends as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is James Evans, CEO and Creative Director of CARE, that's Companioned and Animals for Reform and Equity. James, my friend, how are you?
Hello, Jose. How are you?
I'm good. James and I have a lot of texting. We connect all the time. And I love that we get to share and have a conversation with all the people who are joining us today. So thank you for your time. I know you are incredibly in demand right now.
Well, I don't think I'm in demand. I think, thankfully, I think we're at a precipice of trying to understand where to go next in this country as far as inclusion and diversity are concerned. But I love you, and I think we're doing great work together, and we'll continue because there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I know you've been really at the forefront of a lot of conversations with a lot of different animal welfare and non-animal welfare organizations about diversity, equity, and inclusion over the past 8-9 months. I know CARE is still in its beginning stages of an organization and yet has been really front and center. So I'm wondering, what have been some of the key learnings thus far about insights from your conversations? Not a pretty simple question to start us off, right?
I mean, I think it's important, even as a subject matter expert, right? We're all still learning so much. The thing that I'm so happy to learn in doing this work is that there's so many people of color that are already doing the work. Whether or not they're doing it in their own communities, or whether or not they're doing the work within other organizations. For instance, this year I met Akeisha that was formerly with Best Friends and now is with another organization, but she's a fantastic attorney. I met last night. We had a great Zoom with Dr. Courtney and Noah and Milo. And Noah is a young man. He's got 450,000 followers on Instagram, young African-American man, and he has a support dog. And it was just so nice to both hear them, but see other people enjoying their sort of life stories, even the part of life stories that were, I think, difficult to hear because both of them have, experienced racism. But it was still, we had an incredibly attentive audience, and I'm sure we do tonight. And so it's been really, really, really good to see that. The other thing that we continue to learn is how much work this is. This is a lot of work. You know, these conversations are only the beginning. The struggles we have around racism and lack of diversity in this country are ever present. They're not just going to vanish, right? Women are still making on the dollar less than men. And these are things we need to solve, and they're not going to go away overnight. So I think what we're relearning is that this is a lot of work, but there are lots of inspiring people out there, and I just can't wait to bring more of them to the forefront.
Yeah. And from all these conversations and meeting folks, like what stands out to you now that didn't before in terms of like, where are we getting stuck and where's progress being made?
You know, I think I, I will tell you one of the places I see us getting stuck, and this is a struggle. It's almost a chicken and an egg kind of thing, where we're getting stuck, I think, having conversations amongst ourselves in this field. And that by and large means amongst white women, right? We're having conversations, not so much at Best Friends, but I think at other organizations where we're not going to get to the heart of where we really need to go in, with DEI, if people of color are not at the table, not a part of the conversation. You can, as earnestly as you want to solve the problem, but people of color must be part of that conversation and must be leading those conversations. And I think in dominant culture, often what we tend to do is we want to fix a problem as quickly as possible. We recognize that this is a problem, whether it was George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or whatever comes to mind. We see this and we want to get out there really quickly and solve it and get past it. And you know, we're signing up for DEI courses and all of that is great, but the reality is that part of the problem with dominant culture is that it's so dominant. And if minorities aren't part of that conversation, then we're really not going to get to that next level where real inclusion and diversity happens. And I would say if you don't have a lot of minorities around you to be part of the conversation, Zoom is awesome. The other awesome thing is the lived experience through narrative. There are amazing, amazing books by people of color and other marginalized groups. And hearing those stories and observing those stories is really the next step in moving forward. So I wouldn't say that we're stuck. I think we just need to stop thinking that this is something that can be trained away, that there's one course that we can take, when really we have to change the way we think about our life structure, think about who's in our lives, think about why they're in our lives, and how adding new people can add to our lives. Because if there is a place that we get stuck, it's in this concept that diversity inclusion are singularly for the minority. And really being inclusive brings richness to your own life and to your own organization. And so if we can get past that concept, that we're doing folks a favor, as opposed to adding, it's additive to us as an organization and as a person, I think we'll go leaps and bounds from there.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think for the group and the folks listening, when we say people of color and we talk about diversity, we also mean all the dimensions of diversity.
Absolutely.
You know, I know a lot of times we'll speak in those terms because that is the house the most on fire right now. So I think it's appropriate. But for all of you who
Yes.
I know are thinking about it, when we talk about diversity, we mean like the comprehensive, all the various protected classes, anyone who is marginalized. So just as we talk about this, just know that that's the context behind it. And James, you and I have talked about some of the, like what you talked about, the challenge of wanting to jump in and solve a really, really complex problem. And we've talked about in animal welfare, how it's because lives are on the line, right? Like we're working to save lives and the clock is ticking in some cases. And so there's this kind of sense of urgency that comes with the work we're doing. And I think it's sometimes important to take a step back and see that that sense of urgency could serve us in when it comes to saving a life, but that same urgency does not serve us when we're trying to talk about how to really work on bridging the gaps that are there from a diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Would you agree to that?
I agree. I agree 100%. I mean, but I think it's this feel, but I think there's also something about this country. We're kind of we're very connected to productivity, and unfortunately, you know, those kind of concepts are very much attached to factory farming. This idea that we've got to do things in gross, we've got to get things organized. You know, these animals can't have a life, so we've got to put them in cages and keep everything organized so that we can, you know, keep things going and meet deadlines and get, you know, things delivered. And it's a really it's antithetical to building emotional intelligence, and that's really what, you know, the DE&I work is really about, is building emotional intelligence. And if you're lucky enough to already be gifted with it, great. But if you don't have that, it takes time. You have to synthesize yourself to that. And I'm glad you mentioned the other marginalized groups, because part of the research that we did with Project Implicit from Harvard, that some of you on have probably participated in that survey that went out. The unfortunate thing about it is that the group of people that are the most marginalized in this country are people that have social economic struggles. So if you look at the survey results, the bias level in this field, not in the country, this was specific to animal welfare. The bias is essentially, we're okay with white folks. The next level down is we're kind of okay with Spanish-speaking Latino folks. We really don't like Black folks so much in terms of bias, but the folks we really struggle with are people that are underserved, people in social economic class. And so if you happen to be two of those things, you know, Spanish-speaking, Latin, and underserved, or African American and underserved, or white and underserved, it stacks accordingly. And so we really, really struggle with disconnecting poverty from other negative things like criminality and intelligence. And so I think we really have to do a better job of not associating poverty with sort of the ills, right? Because you can be underserved and still be a genius. Genius is proportional, right? And so I think we need to do a much, much better job of thinking about our people who are struggling in particular, and not thinking of them as associated with some other negative ill.
I can listen to you talk all day because I always learn something, and I just really appreciate how you're framing this and how giving us in this industry kind of some food for thought, and so that we can think about things differently, so that we can act differently, and therefore our outcomes are different, which is at the end of the day what we're after: new, better, different outcomes. So I could definitely talk to you all day, but we have some special guests with us. We have some special guests, and so for those of you who were part of part one, you know that what we're doing here at Best Friends is really leveraging our staff and all of their talent and their experiences, professional life experiences, to really help not only shape and inform, but to lead the diversity, equity, and inclusion work here at Best Friends. So we have 6 culture councils led by 12 co-chairs. So 12 people are leading those 6 councils, 2 people per council. And then there's a total of 60 people who are engaged in this work. And then there's a whole nother group of people, myself included, in a support team that works to support the infrastructure of the culture councils, which really aim at looking at every aspect of our operation and making sure we're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to those things. And so what we're going to be hearing from today are the 3 remaining Culture Council co-chairs, that's a mouthful, so that they can tell you a little bit about who they are and what they're working on. And so again, we at Best Friends do not position ourselves as experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we're also not letting the fact that we're not experts hinder us from actually starting to do meaningful work. And we're working in consultation with folks like James, so to make sure that when we do it, we're doing it in a thoughtful, non-destructive way. And so today, what you'll be hearing are just some things for you to consider that may make sense for you to start to think about and implement and right size for your own organization. So it's an offering essentially. So with that, I'm going to ask our very first co-chairs to join us on camera. And this is from the People Experience Council. And so we have Don and Mike. And so Don and Mike, I'd love for each of you to just take, a minute introducing yourself. What do you do at Best Friends, and what inspired you to raise your hand and say, I want to help Best Friends with this work? Why don't we start with you, Don?
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Dawn Binion-Stewart, and I am an HR generalist here at Best Friends. DEI matters to me for an array of reasons, and I raised my hand to be a part of this, not only because it's something that is an integral part of my training and something that I focus on daily in the work that I do, but from a personal standpoint, I am obviously a Black African-American woman and who is working in animal welfare. And I know what it feels like to be part of an industry without seeing many others who actually look like me. And I know what it looks like with, even though the vast amount of my family, my community, as well as my friends are animal lovers. Additionally, I also know what it's like as a young child, what my dream was, and that was to be a veterinarian. And I steered away from that dream because I did not see my reflection. And I do not want anyone else to be discouraged by that. And so I actually raised my hand because I wanted to be a part of creating an inviting, inclusive environment that everyone can feel that can be a part of.
We're so lucky to have you, Don. Mike, my friend, Mike in Texas, holding it down, wishing you love and warmth and all of that, but welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Mike Bricker.
What's up? Yeah, my name's Mike Bricker. I am on our shelter embed team, and I'm in Abilene Animal Services as the Animal Services Director. I raised my hand to join this council, or to join a council, because being a Hispanic male in animal welfare, I mean, my first job in animal welfare, I noticed immediately it wasn't the most diverse group of people. So I think building a diverse team is super important. I mean, when you're thinking about any type of sports team, I mean, there's all different positions. To have a good team, it has to be diverse. So I really think that, I love the work that's going on. I love getting a chance to work with such amazing people. James from CARE, Jose. I mean, it's just been so amazing. And that's why I wanted to do this. I wanted to, whenever there's people missing from the table, it's really important that we get them there.
I agree, and we are lucky to have you. So my first question to each of you is, what are the areas of focus for the People Experience Council?
Sure, I could take that one. So the areas of focus, we have a few. It's recruitment, professional development, equity, growth, and retention for both staff and volunteers. So we're focusing on a lot of things, and to dig a little deeper, we really want to not only be diverse in our recruitment, but also making sure that we're keeping a diverse staff as well. We want to offer opportunities for growth and development, and connect resources to people that need it. Another huge thing is accessibility. We want to make sure that getting a job with Best Friends, we want to make it as accessible as possible. Not only getting a job, but just being a volunteer as well. So those are the areas that we're trying to focus on.
Very cool. Don, anything to add, or shall we go to our next question?
We can move on to the next question.
All right, James, you're up.
Yeah, I'm curious, both of you, like what do you see as the barriers to creating a diverse workforce at this point?
Sure. Okay, I'll take this one, Mike. So one of the barriers that we see is definitely the hiring process. Something that is very common in this industry is the expectation for candidates to have animal welfare experience. This leads to the workforce continuing to reflect what it actually looks like today. So it's actually advantageous for an organization to focus more on culture as well as soft skills when determining the right fit, because someone who has an extreme amount of animal welfare experience and comes in and disrupts the environment may not be able to be as effective, may not effectively communicate or as well as collaborate. And this can ultimately create some sort of toxicity, which in the long run, that might not be a person you want to have in the role. So really, like, a focus should be more so on someone who's passionate about animals, as well as the skill set to work with humans. Also, a lot of times hiring managers are focused on finding someone who's ready to hit the ground running. And I think for a lot of people, managers have to realize that there is an expectations that you do have to train people when they come in. People are not normally ready. It's not necessarily a fair expectation. In addition, I think that a barrier is like where we post. You know, if we always post on hiring platforms, everyone doesn't have access to necessarily computers. A lot of people are utilizing smartphones. So you need to make sure that your ads are optimized and that, you know, they're viewable on mobiles. Also think about like maybe posting on newspapers, flyers in different communities or other means, just so that you're making sure that you're having that touch in all communities. Not having an inclusive environment. When people don't feel like they're welcome, that can absolutely be a barrier, because then they're not even going to take that step towards towards animal welfare. So it is really important to create a sense of belonging. Then also pay scale. Animal welfare and nonprofit in general has lower pay scales, and so for similar jobs in this sector, it's hard for people to actually move forward and take that job when they have to make a certain living, you know, and maybe they don't have a spouse that can balance that out. So pay scale also can be a barrier for people to join.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a lot. Great.
Definitely. There's more.
I mean, that's what I was saying from the beginning. There's so much work to do, right? There's no reason to try to rush through this. What do you got, Bricker?
I mean, how do I follow that? I mean, she's great. I really don't have much to add. I mean, I think another thing is, and I'm not sure if you mentioned this, Dawn, but like our marketing, you know, making sure people see themselves in the job. You know, the more that we can put out there with diverse, you know, marketing pictures, videos, all those type of things, you know, people have to see themselves in the job to know that this is something for them too. So if I had to add anything, that's what I would add.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add to that too, Mike, for those listening, is the best marketing is going to come off of your authentic work. And so I think what you want to veer away from is this virtue signaling by putting people of color, people who represent a different diversity dimension on your collateral and calling it a day. That's a big part of it. As Dawn talked about, like, representation really matters, but it's important to roll our sleeves up and actually partner, work, engage, collaborate with the various communities that perhaps we haven't engaged at all, or we've engaged in more of a we're here to provide a service as opposed to we're here to partner and work where equals. Like, that's a very different dynamic at play, because if you're doing that work, then you will naturally have authentic things that you can share out, because people can tell when it's just virtue signaling versus like truly you're walking your talk.
Yes, and that virtue signaling can happen even in the best of situations, even within, you know, a diversity committee, right? You have a diversity committee, but you're not committed to diverse hiring, right? So you have to be really, really careful that you're not looking diverse versus actually doing the work. And it is work. If you're not used to it, there's work to be done. It's not easy. But I want to ask you to, as the last question, you know, what would your advice be to that point, right? Because we're right on it. What would your advice be to other organizations that are doing sort of outward facing DEI, diversity and inclusion initiatives? Like, what, you know, obviously we don't want to do virtue signaling. So, you know, what is your advice to other orgs?
Okay, I'll go first, Mike. All right, so I would advise definitely lean in on your culture. Like, really take an honest look at what it looks like, what it feels not only to you, not just to you, but to everyone, and really look at what you want it to be. make cultural commitments on every level of your org, because it doesn't make a difference if only a certain level is committed to it. You have to ask yourself, does it feel inclusive? You know, I encourage people to conduct an employee engagement survey so you can get like a true value of what people are feeling and then adjust accordingly. Another suggestion is to benchmark the current state that you're in. Actually look at the data that you collected and assess where you are, because some of those findings may surprise you. You may be strong in a certain area, but you know, there's other areas that you didn't realize you were strong in, but there's other areas that will shape what your focus should be because that area may be weak. Another suggestion also is to revisit some of your guidelines. And I'm going to really point that in particular towards like volunteer expectations. Volunteers are a great way to connect with the community. And a lot of times there's a lot of expectations out there where, you know, you have to do certain things to actually be a volunteer, which can be an extreme barrier when people may not have enough time. Or certain things that cause them not to do every aspect of, or even being a youth, you know, and really, if you can do that, you know, you can change how people view in the community through the volunteer system, which is a great barrier to break. Also, I'm going to say, I encourage people to educate themselves, become an ambassador and ally of DEI, and really be okay with being uncomfortable and learning. Do not, like I think Jose was mentioning it, do not hesitate to reach out, or maybe it was, never mind, maybe it was James. Do not hesitate to reach out to community groups or leaders. But when you do that, be authentic in your approach. This is such great work to be a part of, and people are, I would say, hungry to be included and invited in. I think a lot of times though, that fear to get started kind of stops you from doing it. So don't let fear guide you. Go ahead and move forward and just be authentic when you approach a community leaders.
That's great advice. And I would just add on particularly on the survey is, you know, try to make that survey anonymous as much as you can, and be okay with the results. I think so often when it comes to race and marginalized groups, we often feel that the comments that we're getting hurt us because we think being a good person means that we haven't hurt someone else in this other way, or our biases haven't gotten in the way. And you can be a good person and still have a bias, right? And if someone says you have a bias, it just means it's something you have to work on, something your organization has to work on. So that survey information is important, and don't discount it just because it kind of wounds you when you read it and review it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mike, do you have any kind of closing thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one way that I always start with any problem or trying to figure out what to do next is by gathering data. I think it's so important. You know, you really need to gain a deeper understanding of what your gaps are in order to make plans. I think another thing is what's your budget? Not all of these things are going to take, you know, money to do. But when you're making a commitment, sometimes that takes an investment and it's monetary. So figure out what you have in the budget, or create a budget for this. It's super important. And then the last thing I would add is just make sure it's baked in. This shouldn't be something, DE&I shouldn't be something that we're just adding on, or an extra arm of something, or something that we're just placing somewhere else. It should be part of everything that your organization does. And the last thing is just get started. No matter how you start, no matter what you do, get started. Let's get started today. There's a bunch of people that would love to help you. So that's it.
And thank you, Mike. And you said data, which is the perfect, that's why I was smiling so big. I was like, you gave me my carrot, I'm going to take it. So our next council member, co-chair that we're going to talk to is Karl. And he has a colleague named Michael who's not able to be here today. And they head up the Data Council because we are best friends. And at the core of who we are is we really want to be data driven. We want data to drive our priorities and how we can really be the most impactful with the resources that we have. And resources always being our time. So with that, Karl, I'd love to just, if you could introduce yourself to everyone, what you do at Best Friends and why you raised your hand.
Sure. Thanks, Jose. My name is Karl Ruetz. I've been in Best Friends 5.5 years now. my current title is kind of vague. It's Senior Application Architect, but what I really do is mentor our developers, provide some support for our web team, support, some of the applications that we purchased as a company. And I do write a lot of software, and a lot of that software reaches out to the wide world and pulls data into Best Friends, into kind of our data arena, if you will, so that other people that are a lot smarter than me can analyze that data and create useful information from it. Before I came to Best Friends, I was part owner of a small engineering firm back in Central Texas. And while managing that business, it was a point of mine to make my team diverse. And I don't really know what started that in my head, but it was something I always wanted to do, and it was a big priority for me. So my engineering team consisted almost entirely of people of Latin descent, because that's the minority that was around me there in Central Texas, and women. Those are the two things I focused on primarily, because women just weren't into technology and science 25 years ago, very much at all. And so I just thought it was important to get that involved. But being in Texas, even in the Austin area, meant that I got a lot of pushback from the community that was immediately around me for doing that. And I learned that it was not a real popular thing to do. And we were a very successful business. It wasn't like it hurt our business, but it just disturbed me that was a problem. So here at Best Friends, when this opportunity arose, it seemed like a perfect extension, if you will, to continue what I was doing back in Austin. And it occurred to me, just questions kind of popped into my head, how many people are we leaving out of our efforts to save animals simply because we aren't marketing to their particular demographic, kind of what Mike and Don were talking about a moment ago. And as an extension of that, how many animals are going homeless or being killed in shelters because of our biases, and how, even if those biases are unintended, right? So that was what made me want to get involved. Interestingly, right after I got involved, one of the first 2 or 3 meetings we had, it was brought to my attention by, while we were just kind of having open discussions amongst ourselves and amongst our teams, that just the fact that I'm a 6'4", 250-pound white male with horses in my front yard, and I drive a big red pickup truck, made me someone that some of the people that I'm trying to reach out to might actually be afraid of. And I never even considered that being a problem. So that's something else that I'm hoping can come out of being a part of this process, is that I can ease those fears and bring all these groups closer together so that we can work together to save animals.
That's beautiful, Karl. Thank you so much for being here. And so I know that when we talk about data, especially collecting data on protected classes, essentially, getting data on race and ethnicity, LGBTQ, gender identification, folks who have a disability, age, all of these things, we know that we need to be really mindful. We need to be thoughtful about that. So how do we go about creating policies that allow us to collect the data that we need without it being overly intrusive and making people feel violated?
Yeah, I wish Michael Cabela, my other co-chair, could be here with me, because one of the things Michael likes to say is that, yeah, we need all the data, right? But we don't want to be creepy. And that's kind of one of his favorite sayings, right? So I'm going to steal it from him. The real thing is, how do we go about collecting this type of data without stalking people? I mean, that's really what it's about. A couple of examples that kind of come to mind are like Facebook, right? That's a place where we can get lots of data on lots of people. If someone from, say, that's a member of Best Friends, not a employee of Best Friends, but just somebody who's a member of Best Friends, was to post a picture of their new baby on Facebook, and that data gets collected by our system, and we respond to them with some kind of personalized content, well, that's kind of creepy, okay? That really has the feel of being a stalker, and we don't really want to do those kinds of things. If we don't feel comfortable like sending a friend request to this person because we don't really know them personally, then we shouldn't be grabbing information like that and making use of it. That's where we can cross that line. We don't want to assume that people are willing to share all their information because they share a little bit of it, right? So you don't want to just kind of force that on them. So if they give you a little piece of information, don't turn that information around and try to get more, right? That's another way that you can kind of come across as a stalker or stalkerish, if that's a word. So, like if a person says, I like red wine, don't just immediately send them a bottle of personalized bottle saying, hey, look, I remembered you, right? That starts to feel kind of weird. And then you always want to be able to demonstrate some sort of value towards your cause with any data that you collect. You don't want to just, you do want to collect a good amount of data because you never really know exactly what data you need, but you want to be able to define the value of that data and compare the value of that data to the impact that it's going to have on the person or persons that it's being collected from. So, you got to be sure that you're not crossing lines in that way when you're collecting data. Otherwise, you will be seen kind of as creepy.
Mm-hmm. And I would encourage all of you who are starting to endeavor on this is work with your human resource. If you have a legal, whatever that team is, on what that should, the kind of policies and the framework for collecting data should look like. So we work really closely with our HR and in-house counsel on that. But James, I know for you, Carrie is actually collecting a lot of data. So I'm sure you have, some thoughts about what we should, tell me, what do you think about this?
I mean, first, Karl, I've heard your story before about when you were a business owner, and I applaud you. I think you and I suffer from similar visual things where, maybe there are people of color that are afraid of you because you're a large man in a pickup truck, and I've got the opposite problem. So I think we walk in the same path often, but I really applaud what you were doing at your former business, because it's so important to take that kind of initiative. Data is so important. You're right, Jose, and we're collecting a lot of it, and we're finding ourselves collecting a lot of data that hasn't been captured well by animal welfare. There's so much information about people of color and other marginalized groups that we simply haven't captured because the narrow path of a lot of the data that we have is coming directly from shelters and animal control. And so if folks aren't interfacing with shelters and animal control, then where are they getting their pets from? How do they feel about their pets? What is their life experience with their pets? What's their life experience with animal welfare? What do they think of us? And so we're really trying to dig deep into the lives of people of color to ask them, what do they need from animal welfare? And then we can step in and supply those needs so that we can bring folks to the table in a way that's responsible and that makes sense and that's accurate. And to that point, my question for Karl is, how do we keep bias, out of our data collection? How do we go about asking questions in the way that aren't biased? And by the way, how do we go about not missing people, whole groups of people? How do we do that?
So I'll address the bias issue first. Bias is one of those things that's really hard to avoid as an individual. Our biases are built into us by our genetics even, and then by the lives we live and what we've been exposed to and the paradigms that those have created within us and how we think. And it's very difficult to keep biases out of data collection and analysis as a single person when we go to start trying to do that. So one of the important ways that we can get that bias out of the collection and analysis process is make sure to include the people that we're trying to analyze. In other words, in this case, we're talking about diversity. So it's really important that we have people from different sexes, different races, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic situations, all that involved in the actual collection and analysis in order to make sure that that bias isn't there, or that all the bias is there, right? Because when you have all the different biases involved at the same time, they kind of cancel each other out. So that's one very important thing we have to do as we go about this process, is to be sure that we not only have the nerds like myself and Michael involved that just like to go out and grab the data and put it somewhere, but that we have individuals thinking about who we're going to get the data from, what that data is going to be, that are thinking about this from a lot of different ways and looking at it in many different facets. The other thing that we can do is ask the people that are providing us this data to review the results when we're done, right? And verify that it represents their beliefs true, right? So a verification kind of a thing to be sure that we've got good data. And of course, another good way to get rid of bias is to have more than one source, right? So rather than just getting data from, say, the FBI on crime or something along those lines, go get it from lots of different places and then compare and contrast those different things. Because very often that will help you kind of average out any kind of bias that can show up into data. And then when you're performing analysis, it's always very important to look for alternate explanations for the conclusions that you come to. It's kind of like that old insurance joke where 80% of traffic accidents occur within a mile of one's home. Well, right. Is that because our neighbors are bad drivers, or is it because 80% of our driving is done within a mile of our home, right? And so you want to be sure that you're not jumping to conclusions because of your bias either, but you're trying to make sure you're looking at all possible explanations for what you're seeing. And then, of course, always review the findings with peers outside of the organization, right? So if Best Friends gathers a bunch of data and we come to a bunch of conclusions, it would only make sense for us to share that with CARE, right? And do you guys see this similar kind of thing? Human beings kind of all follow a similar process in these types of things. We kind of gather evidence, and we do that with varying degrees of competence and diligence. Yes. We filter that evidence through our own paradigms, right? And that's where that bias comes from. And then we analyze what's left to a conclusion. And again, that's done with varying degrees of competence and diligence. And it's really important to have many groups involved in that and many people involved in that, so that those paradigms are varying, so that we get a full analysis of what's going on, and that helps us chase the bias out.
No, I love that, and I love the idea of the weather. If the weather person says it's raining in your neighborhood, you can still look out the window to see if that's actually happening, because sometimes it's not. So yeah. I love that. That's really helpful advice. We're probably out of time, right, Jose?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say, I think we're out of time, Karl, but I do want, we got a question in the chat that I think it's important to clarify. And someone said, when it was referred to as women not into science, they just want to clarify that it was more so is it women weren't accepted by men in the field? Just as an important clarification, because I think we do want to clarify, yes, I think women have always been interested in all the things every other human is. It's women's access to be professionals in that field. So the lack of women in the field by no means is a reflection of women not interested or anything that they have direct control over. It was systems in place. I just wanted to make sure is that your sentiment, Karl? Yeah,
well, at the time, it was more of a social systemic problem, right? Women girls weren't encouraged to study math and science in school. Mm-hmm. So when they got to be adults, they weren't interested in math and science. So, my thoughts then were, if I can gather the women around me that are interested in math and science and are good engineers, then that might inspire and encourage young women that are still in school to study those things. So yes, that was
awesome. Perfect. That's what I knew that's what you meant. All right. So thank you. So the last council member we're going to hear from is a good colleague, friend of mine named Jane. Jane, welcome. And Jane heads our Living Our Values Council, which is the Love Council. And ultimately, we knew that when we started to endeavor on this work, how important it is that DE&I was incorporated into our culture, into how we do things every day. So we have a whole council focused on the integration of DEI into our actual culture. So Jane, we'd love for you to introduce yourself. What do you do for Best Friends, and what inspired you to get involved in this work?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jane. I manage workplace giving for Best Friends, and I raised my hand because as a queer Asian American female, I felt it would be almost negligent to not get involved and to share my experience and my voice as we actively work to craft the culture that we want to see at Best Friends.
That's awesome.
I love that. And I was so excited when you raised your hand. And so I'd love for you to tell everybody what the Love Council is going to be focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jose mentioned, we nicknamed our council the Love Council, Living Our Values, because that's what we're here to do. We really want to live our values. And our focus is trifold. We want to celebrate, recognize, and really foster the strengths and the essence of what makes our organization a really special and unique place to work at. Secondly, we really want to understand any current pain points that our employees are experiencing, and how can we find tangible and very actionable ways to make steps to address those top 2 or 3 issues. And then finally, we really want to effectively communicate our values and consistently measure, are we living up to those values? And if not, how can we course correct so that we are?
That's great. I love that. I have my own question. I love the nickname, by the way. I mean, it's really awesome. I mean, this is a tricky question because it's almost, I'll just ask it, but how does culture and DEI mesh together? I mean, you can answer that for best friends, and I would say you could answer that for just your lived experience.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think if we're doing this work correctly, I believe the culture that we're actively trying to very intentionally design it's almost indistinguishable from building a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. You know, some of the values that we really champion at Best Friends, doing the right thing and being big-hearted, are virtually interchangeable with actively seeking to hear and understand and create space for all experiences and all voices.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. What advice would you give to, your, more than 140 colleagues on right now, to do what you're doing at their own organizations? Where do you get started, thinking about how to make those shifts, internally?
Yeah, I think the very best place to start is to really fully understand the landscape of your organization. Dawn mentioned the importance of surveys, and I think really soliciting opinions from all levels of your organization and creating that very safe opportunity, that space for them to very honestly and anonymously share feedback is very important. I think when we started this work, we put a lot of emphasis on understanding our strengths, but almost more importantly, our weaknesses, because I think the better you understand a problem, the better equipped you are to create a true sustainable solve for your specific problem. And James, to your point earlier about virtue signaling, I think if we are trying to create a one-size-fits-all solve, sometimes that can be a little bit more demonstrative than truly finding that sustainable fix for your specific organization's issues that need to be addressed.
No, I think that's a great distinction.
Yeah. Go, James.
No. I was just thinking, we were earlier in the day, I was talking to someone else about the difference between equity and equality. And we tend to think equal, you just put a stamp on everything, every dog gets the same size bone. And, really, we really have to just slow down and be a little bit more intentional about what does it mean for each individual. I've been in part of spay neuter programs where the spay neuter provider was giving away free spay neuter, and they believed that people in other communities didn't care about the free spay neuter because they didn't show up. And so, I'm looking at where these other communities are, and they are, quite underserved places where people don't have cars. And so if you have a German Shepherd or a large dog, you can't certainly just get on public transportation and go get this animal spay neutered, and then they're somewhat drowsy when they're done. I mean, and so giving it away to free to everyone is one thing, but to really be equitable, right, you have to, in some cases, provide transportation. And so we have to get out of this rubber stamp sort of thinking where even the most well-intentioned thing still needs to be broken down so that each group can absorb it. And that's the same for people we're taking in. There are unbelievably brilliant, obviously, people everywhere, including people that may not be sighted. And so that means that we want brilliant people in, we want geniuses in. We can't not be prepared to change our workspace so that people that don't have sight can still come in and feel comfortable. And so it's that's the work, I think, is recognizing that we're all human individuals that that may need adjustments, but I feel like those adjustments that we're learning to make are making our whole life experience a little bit richer than it was before. I mean, that's how I feel. I feel like this work is kind of exhausting, but it's also, I don't know, it's making me feel, I don't know, just a little warmer inside. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, Jane, thank you for helping lead this work. Culture is really, people say culture eats strategy for breakfast. I am of the belief that culture should be your strategy. And if your culture is deeply and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the values and the tenets and the philosophy of that are actually baked into your culture, you are going to actually have sustainable long-term effects of DE&I. DE&I is not about an initiative, because initiatives start and end. This is just like culture is not an initiative, just like lifesaving is an initiative. These are philosophies. This is an ethic. This is a commitment to a value system. So what I'd love for us to do now is actually, if all of the co-chairs can get on camera, we have a few questions. I only want to spend about a few minutes on questions because I really want to ask James a closing question. So I think we're probably only going to get through one of the questions. So for those of you who don't have answered questions, we're going to do is we're going to redirect you to the network site, and there's a section there where you're actually able to ask your question, and then that's going to be the mechanism in which we're able to provide you some resources and things like that. So make sure to check that out. But one of the questions I want to ask for everybody, and it's someone asking, really wanting to know from each of you about just tangible deliverables. Like, you know, they said, you know, this person said, okay, I get it. I get the barriers kind of that we're talking about, but what are the solutions and what are some of the things? And so to that person, I hope you hear through the examples and through what some of the folks are saying, the solutions and the way we're approaching them are in those answers. But it also might be helpful to just do a, you know, rapid fire, you know, round robin from each of you to say, like, you know, Don, it would be, we're working on a toolkit for XYZ, you know. So I'm going to call on each of your councils. And if you just want to say one or two things that, like, this is the thing that we are working on. So why don't actually, Don and Mike, what are one or two things that the council is saying, this is what we're doing right now?
Okay, so one thing that we're working on is a manager interview guide with that has a cultural focus, really to provide guidance to hiring managers as far as, like, you know, what should they be looking for, what the process looks like, just to give them support every step of the way so that we are hiring with DEI in mind. And Mike, you want to take the next thing?
Yeah, definitely. We're super focused on recruitment. So we're figuring out different ways to recruit people that we've never tried before, you know, different, not just posting online. We're thinking about magazines. We're thinking about all sorts of other ways to get the most diverse group of people to hear that we want them to be a part of our team.
Yeah, and I would add, we're fundamentally questioning what qualified means here at Best Friends. What are those minimum qualifications? And we're challenging all of them.
Yeah, and just one more thing I want to add, we are working on crafting a DEI statement that is forward facing. We have been working on that diligently, and we haven't rushed through this process. We want to make sure that it's right and how we present it to everyone so that it resonates with everyone who's actually going to read it.
Yeah, awesome. Karl, what about for you? What's some of the first thing the data team is doing?
The two first things that we've been focused on are, first of all, helping the other cultures, the other councils work on how they're going to be doing their surveys and things like that, how they're going to ask the questions, and making sure that we're doing it in a way that the data is consistent and not biased. So we're looking to put policies together that we deliver. The second thing then is to actually go get some data. So we're starting with internal data here within Best Friends, and pulling data on our own employees and donors and adopters, and start putting together a database that we can start using to baseline ourselves so we can start measuring our progress as we go forward with this movement.
Awesome. And Jane, the Love Council, what are the one or two things you're working on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So to that point of getting that baseline of data, right? One of the things that we started with is really tasking our council members to connect with employees that are on our front lines, you know, because one of the issues that we see is they're not always able to sit at a desk and fill out those surveys because they are doing the hard work of caregiving and things like that. And so really creating that bridge for us to go to them and have these personal interviews to really understand what their experience and create that space for them to feel that they can honestly share what their pain points are. And so we're gathering all of that information so that we can pick out the common themes that we can take to really move forward on.
Yeah, and what I'll add too is what we believe at Best Friends is for some of the dimensions of diversity, race and ethnicity being one of them, we know that where we have diversity in terms of that dimension is in these frontline worker kind of roles. And so by not having a concrete kind of engagement that is meaningful to them, we're actually missing a big section of our diverse voices. And so that's also why this really matters, because I think that's not uncommon in our movement. And I think some of the data CARE has provided shows that the diversity where it is in those junior level roles, and it just kind of dissolves the further up the org chart you look. So yes, thank you, Jane. And thank you to all of our co-chairs for being here. James, my final question for you is, CARE has been doing some incredible work, and what's next for CARE? What should we expect to see? How can we support CARE, this next year?
Look, one is it's American Black History Month, and I love saying American Black History because Black history didn't happen in a vacuum, right? And so this is part of American history, both the struggle and the ascension of people of color. And so all this month, we are celebrating that with Voices of Color. We've had Voices of Color inside and outside of animal welfare all month long. And the last one we're going to do is next week, and that's focused on the pathway to veterinary medicine for African-American vet students. And we started a scholarship. So I think we're going to post those links. Please join us for the last talk. It'd be great to see Best Friends folks there and partners as well. That's this month, but big picture wise, it's care centers. We're calling them care centers, but really what we're doing is traveling to communities and looking for new leaders. So, on one hand, we're working with organizations like Best Friends and others to really understand DEI and changing the culture of what it looks like to be diverse in animal welfare. That's a lot of work. It's going to be slow growing grass, as someone said to me. But it is happening, and it's obviously happening at Best Friends. But at the same time, we want to find where the new leaders are, where the people that have been sort of overlooked. And right now we're focused in Atlanta. And so far we found 4 leaders of color, and we're also supporting another. So there are 5 people in total. Each one of those folks are getting their own 501c3. In the next couple of months, we're going to have 5 new organizations of color that we help start in Atlanta. And so just to be clear, they won't be calling themselves care centers. We're calling them care centers like I call you guys my friends, but you all have your own individual names, right? So Sterling Trap King Davis is one of those care centers that we're supporting, and there are 4 other ones. And so each one of them will have their own 501c3. The idea is that folks in their own communities know their communities best. So you have Tim in Atlanta, who is a natural born behaviorist, dog behaviorist. He's award winning, and he has an uncanny ability to understand animals. So his care center is going to be very focused on helping his neighbors and friends with behavioral issues with their pets. Each person has their own individual skill set. And so Stanford calls them proximate leaders, people who know their community and have the best chance of helping communities around them. So Best Friends is up here at a macro 30,000 foot level, and care centers are at a micro level. And so we really want to bring all that information we have and scatter it across the country in small communities, starting with the ones that are the most underserved.
Wow, we're so lucky to have you and CARE really leading this effort. And I also have to say, like you and Jen, who is not on this call today, but she is your COO and wife and brilliant mind. And so also thank you to you and Jen for all this work. Thank you to all of our co-chairs for being here and all the folks at Best Friends behind the scene who helped put this together. Andy, special shout out. Andy is someone who actually produces all of these events. This is her last one. She's leaving Best Friends to go work at Jacksonville Humane Society. We love her and we're grateful to her. So I just wanted to formally thank you. And to all of the people who joined us today, thank you for being here. This is, again, this is still the beginning of an ongoing conversation. So more to come. Have a great rest of your week and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jose. You're awesome. And thank you, Andy, and all you Care Council people. I called you Care Council. I meant Culture Council. See?
All right.
All right.
One big happy family. Take care, everyone. Bye.